I'm your host of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association's Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association, and we are the award-winning Legal Lines. My guest here today is Vicki Henry from GLAAD. She's going to give us an update on all these marriage cases that we see going on around the country. And if we have time, we're going to go into the recent amendment to the anti-bullying statute here in Massachusetts. If you'd like to call in, please do. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. Vicki, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for appearing on the show. You guys have a lot going on there at GLAAD.
We do. We do not have a shortage of work, but we really want people to call and let us know, what their concerns are. We run a legal information and referral service, GLAAD Answers, and people can reach us at 800-455-GLAAD.
And you also have a web page as well.
We do, GLAAD.org, and I lead our youth initiative, so youth should be looking at, and their parents should be looking at GLAAD.org/youth.
And that's, it's on the web page, so I don't have to, on the screen, so I don't have to spell it out. And that's a wonderful resource. I mean, I've been to that, and it's very user-friendly.
Yes, yes.
So, but you're here today to talk about all these marriage cases that people see going on around the country where state anti-marriage laws, be they a statute or a state constitutional amendment, are being struck down.
That's right.
And apparently there's a trend going on here.
Well, at this point, we've had an unbroken streak of 19 wins in marriage equality or marriage recognition cases.
And that's 19 wins in states where it's usually a federal court?
Usually a federal court, that's right. And we're talking about Michigan. It was one state where GLAAD actually helped out, and we helped with a trial that happened there in early March. But states like Oklahoma, Utah, Idaho, have all been ruling in favor of either marriage or marriage equality. But Pennsylvania just ruled yesterday.
That's right. And even in the Deep South, Arkansas.
Yes,
so,
right.
Freedom for all. It's just marching. But why don't we go to the case that you guys were good enough to help out on in Michigan?
Sure. That was extra fun for me because I actually grew up in Michigan. I grew up about 13 or 14 miles from where the trial was held. They had a 2-week trial there, and the state of Michigan was basically defending on child welfare grounds, that the whole trial, both sides offered expert witness testimony about how children fare when they have same-sex parents.
Yeah, and we see a lot of this playing out in the public arena. You always hear people, I've heard a couple of people say that they're child rights advocates, and they want, they're defending the right of children to have different sex parents when, they're ignoring, quite frankly, the reality that a lot of children have single-sex parents, one parent, or there are a lot of children. I believe it's 187,000 children in foster care waiting to be adopted. How anybody can make the argument that these children should stay and languish in foster care instead of having a permanent home that has same-sex couples is completely beyond me. Nonetheless, the argument continues to be made, but here in a court of law, they have to back up the argument.
That's right. And it's interesting you brought up foster care because the plaintiffs in the Michigan case had actually adopted children from foster care, but based on the way Michigan law works, only one of them could adopt a child. So one of them had adopted a child and the other one had adopted two children, but they couldn't be the legal parent of the child the other people had done the adoption for. And the way Michigan law works is only married couples can adopt, with a very limited exception, and single people, but not same-sex couples. Same-sex couples could be licensed to be foster parents jointly, but they could not actually jointly adopt. So the case actually started out as a challenge to the adoption statute, and the judge said, well, if it really is a marriage case, because if you could be married, then this statute would not be an obstacle to you adopting the children you're raising anyway.
Because you're married.
Right.
Fit in the statute.
Right.
And isn't that, doesn't it also, what you've just said just goes to the point. They allow same-sex couples to be foster parents.
Yes.
Apparently, they're capable of doing that in the eyes of the state of Michigan, and yet they're not allowed to be married.
Right.
So,
Right.
So there you go. So they had to go through a trial and back up their statements that same-sex couples, for whatever reason, cannot adequately raise children and yet they can be foster parents. So what did they say?
Well, so they tried to, you've laid some landmines out for them, and they've tried to step around those landmines. So they actually entered into an agreement of facts that the plaintiffs themselves, as it was this one couple, they did not agree that they were saints, but they basically agreed that they were provided a caring, loving home, and that the children were being raised well. And so really what they were trying to say is that the optimal environment for raising children is to have a married mother and father married to each other, biological parents to their biological children. So they don't have to deal then with any same-sex couples. They don't have to deal with divorced families. They don't have to deal with single parents.
This is what's optimal, and we want everybody to have that.
Right, right. And that if we restrict marriage, that will somehow encourage that. The problem is what they're arguing is not necessarily connected to one another. Just to give you an example, there are no requirements in Michigan or really any other state in the country that if you get married, that you have to declare that you intend to have children. We don't hinge those two together. In fact, you can say that you won't have children and you are still permitted to get married.
You can get married to an inmate in jail who's in for life.
Right. One of the recent decisions, I think it was Idaho, made a comment about how a Hollywood celebrity can go to Vegas in a drunken haze and wake up married to someone of a different sex, and yet we won't let some same-sex couple that's been together for 30 years and has raised children, we won't let them get married.
Yeah. And so there you go. Apparently they saw the Hangover movies. I don't know.
Right.
So, okay. So in a trial like this, they have to bring in what's called expert testimony, I imagine.
That's right.
And what kind of, if you can explain for our viewers, what exactly is expert testimony, and more specifically, what did that entail in this case?
Well, so in this case, both sides, the people arguing for marriage equality to strike down the Michigan marriage ban and the state of Michigan were offering expert witnesses on child welfare. So it might be an expert in social science, it might be an expert psychologist. It turned out actually that Michigan had a couple of witnesses who were qualified as experts in statistics and analyzing statistical data. And there was some battle about different fields of social science and how different fields do their research, because some groups, especially in the psychological fields, will use smaller sample sizes for their studies, and they'll use what are called convenient samples, which is when you're using, like, you go to a place where you know you'll find the people that you want to study, and or you'll get some subject matters and you'll get some subjects and you'll ask them to refer friends. So that's like a snowball method, but they're small samples. So because at this point, close to 150 of those studies have all said that the children of same-sex couples fare just as well as the children of different sex couples, what Michigan offered were some expert witnesses to try to say that you need a large data set and that you need random sampling and you need a longitudinal study, that you need something that's going to go out like 30 years, that we can't know, you can't look at how kids are partway through their growing up, that you've got to wait until they're much, much older to have time for problems to manifest.
So when you say longitudinal, you're talking about time-wise, how they fare over time. And all right, so Michigan wants this huge study.
Right.
And they want it to span over quite a number of years, one would presume, until the young adulthood of these children of same-sex couples and... Or beyond. Or beyond.
Or beyond, because, you know, sometimes problems don't manifest until you're older.
Yeah, and there you go. So okay, and what studies did the state of Michigan have? Did the state of Michigan have these huge studies with all these people?
Well, that was what was really interesting. Their first witness is a guy named Mark Regnerus. He's a sociologist at the University of Texas. And so he actually gathered, in his field, what is a large data set. And he did an interesting study, but then, the whole issue and our concern was that he improperly defined who was a same-sex couple. So he originally did some telephone screening of some 15,000 couples and eventually narrowed it down to a few hundred couples, and then did some survey sampling to see how people were faring. But in that, he only found 2 children who were being raised from birth to age 18 by the same parents the whole way through. And so what he ended up defining a same-sex couple to mean, or what he called a lesbian parent or a gay parent, was anyone who had been in a same-sex relationship. And he had a minimum period of time, but I can't remember if it was 2 weeks now or 4 months. But it was yes. So you could have somebody, say a woman who'd been in a relationship with a man for 17 years, who'd had a 4-month relationship with another woman, and he would call her a lesbian mother. And so what he ended up doing was he defined heterosexual. His comparison group was married mothers and fathers who raised their children from birth to age 18, and everyone else that he was looking at could be a gay parent or a lesbian parent. So in other words, he took all the instability out of the heterosexual couples, and he basically essentially defined lesbian parents or gay parents as unstable, because he took these short relationships. And he also, there were many other problems. I'm trying to give you the 30,000 foot level here. But even the morning of his testimony, his own department disavowed his research. And he even admitted that he made a mistake in how he defined lesbian or gay parents.
So, yeah, because he defined somebody as gay or lesbian simply because over the course of their life, they had a 2-week relationship with somebody. Or a
very short relationship. And that other person didn't even have to have met the child.
And so that was considered a same-sex couple raising children?
Right. And
it's very strange.
Yes, and the other big problem with what he did is that everybody agreed, both sides experts agreed, that there are factors that do affect child outcomes, and children of divorced parents tend to, on average, not in every case, have a harder time and have not necessarily what poor outcomes, but poorer outcomes, in other words, in comparison. And so because of the age of the people he was studying, almost all of them were from a failed heterosexual relationship. So you have this compounding factor that he didn't account for.
So, and then his department disavows his study, which I can't imagine anybody supporting, but nonetheless, there he goes. So that was one guy. What were the other experts, or what did the court eventually tell you? Do you have any more stories about what these other people did? Or?
Sure. Well, one thing that was interesting was because the overwhelming scientific consensus believes that the children of same-sex couples fare just as well as the children of heterosexual couples, but they're these smaller studies. The other side, the Michigan's experts said, well, you need these large-scale random studies.
Ah, okay. So they've lost on the issue because on the issue of all these studies, which study smaller sizes, and they're the ones that exist. So because they're losing on that issue, they want a huge study which doesn't exist, or?
Well, so that was what was interesting. Was there's a professor at Stanford who didn't, he's actually a straight man who is a statistician and economist. And he thought, well, we could use census data to come up with a large-scale random study using existing census data. And so just out of intellectual curiosity and to fill this hole that these people had said exists, he did that. And he reached the conclusion that children of same-sex couples fare just as well as the children of different sex couples.
So he did a huge study. He did the huge study,
basically. He did the large study, yes.
And he's out of Stanford. He's not hired by anybody. He's just intellectually curious.
Right.